Representative Deluzio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Secretary. Long day. Good to see you here.
And good to see you as well.
I want to talk about clinical trials and some of the reporting on the impacts of whether it's hiring freeze, contract terminations, firings, or some combination of those things. So 2 Pittsburgh clinical trials, according to reports, had not started as of May 6th. These were to treat veterans with advanced head and neck cancers. Have either of those resumed or started?
Well, one, they never started before, and they are starting now because we're now actually reaching out to veterans to be a part of this trial. Those were not, they had not been started before at this point, so you can't stop anything that had not started.
So they've started since May 6th?
They started in the last little bit. They're getting ready right now to recruiting veterans this month.
Okay, so both of those have started. When were they originally planned to start? Because the reporting here is that these were delayed or stalled because of some combination of firings, contract terminations, probationary employees.
Yeah, not that we're aware of it. And I think the interesting thing is here is before any of these other things got involved is they had not recruited patients for these trials.
But just to be clear, when were these supposed to start? Do you know?
I would assume they've been around before the hiring freeze, so it was supposed to start probably earlier. I'd have to get a direct date on that. I'm not going to try and guess.
I'd appreciate a response on that.
Okay, no problem.
There are others that were identified in some of this reporting, specifically at VA Pittsburgh. I think 7 in total, including those 2 that I've asked about, that the impact, again, of whether it was firings, contract terminations, on and on, were that they stopped enrollment in several of these clinical trials, and these were to treat veterans suffering from advanced lung cancer, kidney transplantation, cardiovascular disease, and others. The reporting here is that the planned enrollment was 500, but as of, again, this reporting in May, only 75 veterans had been enrolled. Has that enrollment now continued, and are additional veterans being enrolled?
No clinical trials have been stopped. There's been no cancellations from our decision on clinical trials. Those are still going on, so any issues in those clinical trials will be specific to that issue. One of the things is, too, Representative, and I think to understand here, we have over 1,500 clinical trials going on in the country through the VA, of which there is no centralized management of that from the VA. So getting sometimes information about our clinical trials has been difficult when we started asking these questions, because the VA, as much as we do these clinical trials, are working on them, we have no management of those and how they're started and where they go forward.
Secretary, so you said they hadn't been stopped, which is a little different than what I asked you, though. What I asked you was whether enrollment had been paused. That's the reporting, that 75 of my fellow veterans have been enrolled rather than the planned 500. Again, the reporting is that enrollment was stalled during this period of firings, hiring freeze, contract terminations. Is that true?
They've not started. As far as I know, they're still recruiting people for those trials.
I understand that, but was the recruitment of enrollment stalled during this period?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, I'd like to know if you could find that out for us.
We'll find out.
Because my concern, as you can imagine, is whether it's those first 2 clinical trials on head and neck cancer being delayed to start, or these other at least 5 that I'm aware of from reporting being stalled. Some veterans may not have gotten an access to that kind of care in these clinical trials. Some of those veterans may have gotten sicker. God forbid, somebody may have died. We should know whether any of those things happened. I don't want to guess. I don't want to put you in the spot to guess, but we should know that.
Yeah, and I appreciate the concern there, but also remember one of the things that I want to make very clear here is we've talked about this a little bit in going forward. The clinical trials are used to assess new treatments and new ways to going about it. These veterans were not, and I say this simply not because of what you said, and I'll be frank with you, but what I've heard from others, and they say that they were kept away from all health care. That's just not true. They were still getting the health care through the Pittsburgh VA, but the clinical trials that had not been started, especially in the head and neck cancer area, had not started. So I think there's 2 distinctions here we have. Well, but I'm willing to work with you to look at whatever we need.
Great. I would love to know for each of those trials. And as you say, you're still getting health care, but it might be that clinical trial could be a life or death outcome. It might not be. Well, I think it's important that someone's got a chance who's in a horrible situation, advanced head or neck cancer.
Yeah, I would hope that also, and Congressman, I would love to work with anyone in this committee also as we go forward, how we can actually streamline. This is something I'm looking at now as we've gotten into these conversations more and more on clinical trials, that we actually need to have, in my opinion, a better sort of command and control system so that we know where these are going on and if there are any issues that we can help with as we go forward. Because as you said, some may have gotten help, but also some may not have worked. And are we making sure that that information is available across the system wide so that we know this actually worked, but this didn't? We don't have that information
And
right now.
look, and we all know this, the research VA does has led to some really groundbreaking interventions and treatments for veterans. We have to continue that. I want to spend the last minute and a half or so about morale. I've, and my team have heard from physicians and other folks who work at the VA. I've heard from veterans. There's been plenty of reporting and discussion here today about mental health care in particular and some of the reports of impacts on the return to work and clinicians being placed in an environment where they can't have a confidential discussion with patients. I've talked to physicians myself and heard some of those concerns. I'll throw out an example of someone being put in a room where there's another VA employee that would betray confidentiality with a patient seeking mental health care, asking for headphones or a headset to be able to have some confidentiality, being told no. Should that happen? And if not, what are you doing to fix that?
No, it should not happen. And I think one of the things is to remember is all our VA centers are secure facilities, and they should not be put back in. If they're coming back into work, it would go against, and I made this statement earlier, if they're being brought back in an environment in which they were not supposed to be, then that is a failure of the leadership to bring them back in, because it's also a direct violation of the policy of bringing people back to work. This is not something that we've looked at, and many times we've asked for incidences when it's been reported and then gotten back to it and it worked. So let me just be very clear.
Yep.
If they're coming, if there's an issue, we'd love to hear about that, but also it's a direct violation of the policy coming back to work to not be in an environment in which they're not supposed to be in. So if we have a supervisor who's doing that,
And
we
in
need
the
to
10
do
seconds
that.
I have left, Secretary, if someone's raising those concerns, I'd love a commitment from you that they won't face any consequence for voicing an objection.
No, and I think that we need to know, and I think this is what we've proven, and there's been areas in which there were some concerns, and we've actually made exceptions to say, no, the telework or continue off-work premise can do.
Mr. Chairman, yield back.